April 15, 1945. The thunder of artillery rolled across the hills of Thuringia as the American 11th Armored Division pushed through the last defenses of a dying Reich. Villages smoldered. The air smelled of damp earth, cordite, and despair. In the small town of Meiningen, smoke hung low above the rooftops, curling through the apple orchards. Beneath one of those roofs, a German mother named Marta Keller pressed her hands against her sons' faces, whispering, "Stay quiet, whatever happens." Outside, tank tracks ground against cobblestones, and the world her family had known was collapsing one shell at a time. The Americans came with engines that roared like thunder gods, Shermans and half-tracks grinding through the narrow lanes. To the villagers, they were phantoms in olive drab, their helmets glinting under the overcast sky. Orders shouted in English echoed off the stone walls. For the first time in 6 years, the town heard a language that did not demand obedience but offered warning. The Germans called them Army, the foreign tide that would wash the swastikas from their doors. For Marta, it meant both fear and hope. She had 2 sons, Karl, 17, and Otto, 15, both marked by the Reich as soldiers, but still boys who had never fired a shot in anger. They hid now in the cellar beneath their father's old bakery, trembling as the footsteps of foreign soldiers shook the ground above. The day before, retreating SS troops had passed through Meiningen. They left orders that every able-bodied man must fight. "Deserters will be shot," the officer barked, his voice as cold as the barrel of his pistol. But the army that once terrified Europe was now starving, limping, and disintegrating into bands of men more dangerous than the enemy they fled. When the last of them vanished into the woods, Marta knew the Americans would arrive within hours. Her sons wanted to run. She refused. "You run, they'll find you in the fields," she told them. "We stay, we hide, and we pray the earth keeps our secret." That night, the bombardment began. American artillery from across the Vera River sent glowing arcs through the dark, each explosion shaking dust from the cellar ceiling. Marta counted every blast like a heartbeat, praying the next one would not land on their roof. In the flickering candlelight, she could see the fear in her son's eyes, the same fear she had seen in her husband's when he left for Stalingrad 3 years earlier. He had never returned. Somewhere east of the Dnieper River, he lay buried beneath the frozen mud. Now the war had come home, and it was her turn to decide whether her sons would live or die. At dawn, the shelling stopped. A strange silence fell over Meiningen, broken only by the rustle of boots and the whine of engines. Through a crack in the cellar door, Marta saw them. American infantry moving cautiously between houses, rifles raised. They weren't the monsters Nazi propaganda had promised. Their uniforms were dusty, their faces tired, and their helmets scuffed from weeks of fighting. One carried a chocolate bar in his pocket, another a photograph of his wife. War had aged them all, no matter which flag they served. The first American unit to enter the town was the 21st Tank Battalion. Their orders were simple: secure the road, search for snipers, and disarm any resistance. But in every village, danger hid behind every shuttered window. When the soldiers kicked open the bakery door, flour burst into the air like smoke. Marta froze. They called out, their voices sharp, demanding to know who was inside. She emerged slowly, hands raised, the white apron around her waist stained with dust and fear. A young sergeant pointed his rifle at her chest, his eyes wary. "Any soldiers here?" he asked through a translator. She shook her head, but he didn't believe her. The Americans were under strict orders. No chances, no mercy for ambushes. 2 men pushed past her and began to search the rooms, ripping open cupboards, overturning barrels, and breaking through to the cellar door. She felt her heart stop when she heard them call out for light. Karl and Otto huddled in the dark, clutching each other as the cellar door creaked open. A flashlight beam cut through the shadows. "Down here," a voice shouted. In that instant, Marta acted. She stepped between the soldiers and the stairs, her body trembling. "Wait," she pleaded, pointing to the far wall. "There's something you should see." The translator repeated her words, and the sergeant frowned. He signaled his men to lower their rifles slightly, though their fingers still rested on the triggers. Marta moved toward the rear of the cellar, where a section of stone wall looked older and rougher. She brushed her hand along the bricks, found the hidden seam, and pressed. The stones shifted with a soft grind of mortar. A narrow tunnel appeared, a passage leading beneath the hill, lined with damp earth and rotting timbers. The Americans stared, astonished. The sergeant stepped forward, inspecting it with his flashlight. It ran deep under the town, perhaps 200 feet. "What is this?" he asked. Marta told him the truth. The tunnel had been built during the First World War by her grandfather, who'd used it to hide bread and grain from army requisitions. For years it had lain forgotten, until she rediscovered it after a bombing raid in 1944. Now she had another use for it, to hide her sons from both armies. The sergeant's expression softened. He looked at the two frightened boys and then back at her. "The Wehrmacht?" he asked quietly. She shook her head again. "They are my children," she said, her voice breaking. "Only children." Outside, another squad shouted that they'd found an SS cache nearby, abandoned weapons and explosives hidden under hay. The sergeant turned toward the noise, then back to Marta. He faced a decision no rulebook could cover. Technically, harboring deserters was grounds for arrest. But in the gray dawn light, amid the rubble and exhaustion of a conquered land, he saw no soldiers here. Only a mother and two sons who wanted to live. He turned to his men and ordered them out. "Tunnel's clear," he said. "Mark it and move on. No report, no questions. Just another ruined house in a ruined war." As they left, one soldier quietly placed the chocolate bar on the table. Marta's hands shook as she closed the door behind them, tears streaming down her face. The boys collapsed into her arms. For the first time in months, she let herself breathe. That afternoon, the Americans established a field post outside the town. Trucks rumbled through the streets carrying rations and medical supplies. For the villagers, the occupation felt less like conquest and more like awakening from a nightmare. Soldiers handed out cigarettes, gum, and laughter that sounded strange in a place that had forgotten what it was. But inside her home, Marta still feared discovery. Rumors spread that SS stragglers were regrouping in the woods. If they found her sons alive, she would be branded a traitor. The tunnel that had saved them once might yet be their grave. As night fell, searchlights swept the hills, and distant gunfire echoed faintly. Marta stood at the cellar entrance, staring into the darkness of the tunnel. She could still smell the damp earth and feel the weight of the war pressing above her. She knew this safety was fragile. One knock, one rumor, or one wrong glance could destroy it all. And yet, in that silence, she also sensed something else. The faint hum of engines moving away, the slow retreat of fear itself. The war was ending. But for Marta Keller and her sons, the real question remained. How long could a secret stay buried before the world demanded to know what it had cost to survive? The next morning, sunlight broke over Meiningen like a ghost hesitant to return. The sound of American trucks echoed through the narrow streets, their engines idling beside the church that now flew a white flag. Dust hung in the air, and from the bakery window Marta Keller watched soldiers unload crates marked with stenciled stars. Her son stayed in the cellar, hidden behind the tunnel wall, listening to the hum of foreign voices above. The war had changed shape. It was no longer artillery and flame. It was occupation, orders, and uneasy peace. But peace had its dangers, too. The 11th Armored Division had orders to search every building for hidden weapons or fugitives. Some locals cooperated. Others lied. The Americans were polite but cautious. Snipers still lurked in nearby woods, and rumors spread that SS men disguised as farmers were preparing ambushes. Each patrol entered homes with rifles raised, never knowing who might open fire. For Marta, every knock on the door sent her heart racing. She baked bread for the soldiers when they passed, hoping kindness would disguise her secret. Her flour was nearly gone, her hands raw from kneading dough, but the smell of bread drew smiles and kept suspicion away. In her mind, every loaf was a small act of defiance against death. Late one afternoon, a new officer arrived in town, Captain William Harding of the 21st Tank Battalion. He was tall, quiet, and watchful, his uniform stained by travel. His men called him Iron Bill, a nickname earned from leading his platoon through the Ardennes under constant shell fire. He had seen too many towns like this one, broken walls, hollow eyes, and mothers burying sons. His orders were routine: secure communication lines and maintain order. But he was also a man who noticed what others ignored. When he entered the bakery, He paused at the sight of Marta's trembling hands and the faint sound of movement below the floor. He said nothing, just smiled, and asked for bread. As he waited, he studied the photographs on her wall, her husband in uniform, her sons in Hitler Youth scarves. Every home in Germany had such pictures, but the fear in her eyes told him something was different. When she handed him the loaf, he slipped a ration can of coffee onto the counter. "For your kindness," he said. She nodded, grateful, her voice barely a whisper. After he left, she pressed her palms to the counter, trembling. She could feel his curiosity like a weight. If he returned, the tunnel might not stay secret much longer. In the evenings, the soldiers gathered around the square, their laughter echoing against the broken houses. They shared cigarettes with local boys, handed chocolate to girls, and taught them English words. Yet behind the smiles lay a quiet tension. Several German soldiers captured nearby had confessed that others were hiding in tunnels and cellars. The Americans began probing the ground with steel rods, searching for hidden spaces. When Marta heard that, she almost fainted. Her secret was about to be discovered not by betrayal, but by procedure. That night, she woke her sons and led them into the tunnel. The air was damp, the walls slick with condensation. A single lantern flickered as they crawled through the narrow passage, stepping carefully over fallen stones. The tunnel opened into a chamber barely large enough to stand. Wooden crates lay there, remnants of her grandfather's grain stores. She had hidden blankets, candles, and a small crucifix. "If they come," she whispered, "you stay here. Do not make a sound." Karl tried to speak, but she silenced him with a look. "I lost your father to this war. I will not lose you to the end of it." Meanwhile, Captain Harding's patrols continued their rounds. Reports of hidden tunnels reached him daily. On the third night, his engineers brought a map showing an old network of escape passages built beneath the town centuries earlier, used by smugglers and merchants. One of them, they noted, might pass beneath the bakery. Harding frowned. He thought of the nervous woman and the way she had avoided his gaze. War had taught him to read people as carefully as terrain. He ordered a search at dawn. When the soldiers arrived the next morning, Marta was already waiting. The smell of bread filled the air, masking her fear. Harding entered quietly, removing his helmet as a sign of civility. "Mrs. Keller," he said, "we're checking old tunnels. Nothing personal, just security." She nodded, her pulse pounding in her throat. As they lifted floorboards, she stood motionless, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. The soldiers found the trapdoor, pried it open, and lowered a lantern. A rush of cold air swept upward. Harding crouched, peering into the dark. The tunnel stretched out like a throat-swallowing light. He hesitated. Something in him recoiled at the idea of dragging frightened civilians from hiding. He straightened and looked at her again. "You said this was an old bakery tunnel?" he asked. She nodded. "My grandfather built it, long before this war." He studied her face. She didn't blink. After a long silence, he closed the trapdoor. "Seal it," he told his men. "Mark it as cleared." The soldiers hesitated but obeyed. Harding turned back to Marta. "You've been through enough," he said softly. Then he left, leaving her trembling in the quiet. That night, Marta crept into the tunnel. Her sons were waiting, eyes wide with terror. "What happened?" Karl asked. She told them the truth, that an American officer had found the tunnel and chosen mercy over duty. "He knows," she said, "but he will not betray us." For a moment, they sat in silence, listening to the muffled hum of trucks outside. Then Otto, the younger one, whispered, "Mama, why did he help us?" She thought for a long time before answering. "Because he saw what this war has done to mothers," she said. And perhaps he remembered his own. As weeks passed, Meiningen changed hands from a combat zone to occupied territory. The Americans set up radio posts and medical tents. Children began returning to school under Allied supervision. For the first time in years, the town heard music again, an accordion played by a soldier near the square. Marta's bakery reopened, though her heart still raced whenever she heard boots at the door. Each loaf she sold bought another day of safety. Her sons took turns hiding in the tunnel, emerging only at night to breathe fresh air in the orchard behind the house. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Captain Harding returned alone. He stood at her doorway, hat in hand. "We're moving north tomorrow," he said quietly. "The war's almost over." Marta thanked him, unable to find words. He looked past her into the empty shop. I hope when this is done, he added, you can start again. Then, almost as an afterthought, he placed a folded paper on the counter. It was a ration slip for flour and sugar, small but priceless. For peace, he said, before walking away. After he was gone, Marta opened the paper and found a note written beneath the ration line. It said only, "No mother should have to choose between truth and survival." She pressed it to her chest and wept silently. Outside, the last convoys rumbled away, leaving behind a town half ruined but breathing again. In the tunnel that night, Carl lit a candle. "Do we come out now?" he asked. Marta looked toward the faint light seeping through the cracks above, the sound of distant thunder replaced by birdsong. She nodded slowly. "Yes," she said. "The war has already left us. It's time we leave it behind." The three of them climbed out together. Stepping into the dawn, the war officially ended for Meiningen on May 8, 1945. The church bells that had been silent for years rang once more, their cracked tones echoing through the valley. The townspeople emerged from cellars and barns, blinking in disbelief at the pale spring sun. Across Europe, flags changed overnight. But in this quiet corner of Thuringia, victory felt less like celebration and more like exhalation. American convoys rolled out, replaced by administrative units and supply trucks. What remained was silence, and the ruins of a world that had devoured itself. For Marta Keller and her sons, survival had been bought with secrets, and now they had to learn how to live with them. The bakery reopened under the same sign her husband had carved before the war. Keller brought. The smell of bread returned to Meiningen before any other symbol of normal life. American soldiers still came by, their boots leaving dusty prints on the worn floorboards. They traded cigarettes for loaves and laughter for the few German words they knew. Marta smiled politely, always cautious, always measuring her words. Behind that calm face lived a storm. Guilt for what she'd hidden, gratitude for those who'd let her hide it, and the lingering fear that one question, one careless story, could undo it all. In the evenings, when the last customers were gone, she would light a candle and whisper her husband's name into the empty room. Her sons adjusted to the strange new peace in their own ways. Carl, the elder, worked in the bakery, strong from hauling flour sacks through the shattered streets. Otto roamed the orchards, collecting shrapnel and bits of broken helmets like trophies of a world he never wanted to remember. When the American engineers rebuilt the bridge across the Vera River, he stood watching them for hours, fascinated by the machines, jeeps, bulldozers, cranes, that moved with mechanical grace. He was only 15, but the sight of order returning to chaos stirred something deep within him. "They build faster than we ever could," he said once. His mother nodded. "They build because they do not fear what comes next," she answered softly. In July, the Americans began withdrawing from Thuringia, handing control to Soviet forces under post-war agreements. The town prepared nervously for the red flags that would soon replace the white stars. Rumors spread of arrests, deportations, and confiscations in villages farther east. Marta's neighbors whispered about lists, people accused of collaborating, hiding soldiers, or hoarding supplies. She knew if anyone revealed the tunnel, her sons could be taken. When the first Soviet truck arrived, its soldiers dismounting with cold, watchful eyes, she felt the same dread she had known when the SS came years before. The uniforms had changed, but the fear felt the same. The Soviet commandant, Major Petrov, established headquarters in the town hall. He was a tall man with silver hair and the calm detachment of someone who had seen too much death to be moved by anything less. His men searched for hidden German officers and confiscated weapons. When they came to the bakery, Marta offered bread, as she had done before. Petrov accepted, studied her quietly, and asked in broken German, "No soldiers here?" She met his gaze. "Only my sons and I," she said. He looked around the small room, the smell of yeast and warmth filling the air. "Good," he said simply. "We're finished. Now people eat." But survival was more than bread. The Allies had divided Germany, and Thuringia, once under American protection, now belonged to a different world. Radios carried strange new words: occupation, reparations, reconstruction. For Marta, these meant only one thing: keep silent, keep working, and keep the tunnel secret. When rumors of confiscated property spread, she sealed the tunnel entrance with new bricks and plaster, smoothing the wall until it looked as though it had never been broken. To anyone else, it was just stone. To her, it was memory itself, entombed. One evening, as rain pattered softly against the bakery windows, Carl asked her what would happen if people found out. "They'll call us cowards," he said. "They'll say we hid while others fought." Marta looked up from her work, her hands dusted with flour. "Let them talk," she said. "You cannot rebuild a country with ghosts. You rebuild it with those who survived." Her voice held no pride, only exhaustion. He nodded slowly, understanding more than she realized. Years later, he would repeat those same words to his own children when they asked why the family never spoke of the war. As months passed, Meiningen slowly mended. Fields were planted again, walls rebuilt, and windows repaired with salvaged glass. The scars of war remained, craters filled with rainwater, twisted metal in the hedgerows. But life returned with the stubbornness of weeds. The tunnel under the bakery became a legend whispered among children, a story about hidden treasure or escaped soldiers. Only Marta and her sons knew its truth. It was not treasure that had been hidden there, it was innocence, preserved in darkness while the world above went mad. In 1947, letters from American soldiers occasionally reached the town, carried by relief workers. One day, a worn envelope arrived addressed to Mrs. Keller, Meiningen. Inside was a brief note written in English, the handwriting familiar. "We never forget the faces that remind us what we were fighting for. May your sons grow in peace. W.H." Attached was a photograph, Captain William Harding standing beside his tank, smiling faintly. The note carried no address, only a signature. Marta framed it quietly and placed it on the wall beside her husband's portrait. To her, both men had fought wars, one to conquer, the other to save. Years passed. The tunnel remained sealed, the secret passed like a relic between generations. Otto became an engineer, building bridges for a country split in two. Carl ran the bakery until his hair turned gray. Their mother lived long enough to see the Berlin Wall rise and, later, to hear of men walking on the moon. History moved on, yet inside her mind, the war never fully ended. Sometimes, at night, she would dream of the sound of engines, the shouts in English, and the way the sergeant had turned his head and pretended not to see. She would wake with tears on her face and whisper a prayer for the unknown kindness that had spared her sons. When Marta died in 1971, her sons found among her belongings a single key wrapped in cloth. Attached was a note written in her elegant, faded script. "Do not forget what mercy costs." They understood. They reopened the tunnel one final time, shining flashlights into the dark. The air smelled of damp earth and memory. They found the old crates, the rusted lantern, and on the wall, their mother's faint handprint preserved in dust. They sealed it again, not out of fear, but reverence. Decades later, after reunification, the bakery still stood. Tourists sometimes visited Meiningen, admiring its restored streets and quiet charm. Few noticed the plaque near the church that read, "In this town, compassion crossed enemy lines." No one knew it referred to a mother who defied armies with nothing but courage and silence. But in the Keller family, the story endured, told in hushed tones over bread and coffee, each retelling soft as forgiveness. War ends when men stop fighting. But peace begins only when mercy takes its place. Marta Keller had not worn a uniform or carried a weapon. Yet her act of courage, showing a tunnel instead of surrendering her sons, had undone the logic of war itself. It proved that even in humanity's darkest hour, compassion could survive the crossfire, and in the quiet after the guns. When history wrote its ledgers and generals claimed their victories, her story remained unwritten, known only to a few, whispered between generations, like the echo of a heartbeat beneath the floorboards of a forgotten bakery. Because sometimes, in war, the bravest act is not to fight, but to hide love where the world cannot destroy it.